so today is part 2 in the series of messages titled "The Bible is the Only Accurate Prophecy and History Book." There's plenty of other books that have been written that have some accuracy in there, but especially when it comes to prophecy, it's the only accurate book. And also, even when it comes to history, it has everything that it says is historically accurate, where some history books are biased because whoever wins the war writes his version of the story. And so the Bible, because it's inspired by L, it means that it is going to be correct in every way. Right, so we're going to go through 5 parts, proving that the Bible is accurate, that it's something we can live by, base our lives off of. The first thing, we're going to go through the fact that the historicity of the Bible is 100% accurate. We're going to show some of that. We're going to go through and show that genetically, when it comes to genetics, it's accurate and we can absolutely depend on it. The third one is geographic. When you look at geography and you try to trace people back to the origins, the Bible is absolutely the most accurate one. It doesn't deal, obviously, with stupidity of evolution and us coming from, Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthal man and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, and then it's linguistically, it is accurate. Linguistically, it is accurate. And then prophetically, it is accurate. So those are the 5 things we're going to go over: historic, genetic, geographic, linguistic, and prophetic. All right, last week, we went over the historicity of it. And what we're going to be doing is showing all the way from Adam up to our day that the Bible is accurate in its chronology. All right, and we're not going to cover this slide again because we did that last Sabbath, but again, you can check all those scriptures, you can check the math, and I don't know if I said it last Sabbath, but one of the things that you can do, if you look at Adam, we're estimating that he was born 4000 BC. And if you look over to the right where it says death year, and then under it says BC and N, you see because his lifespan was 930 years, and we're counting down from 4000 up to the time when Christ was born. And from that time, we count up in numbers. So if he lived for 930 years, you just take 4000, you subtract 930, and you get to 3070 is when he died. And then again, if you look starting going upwards from the number of years that have transpired since the time that Adam was born, you start at year 0, you count 930. And if you look over to the column in the right, or not the column in the right, but the one that says the death year, if you add the 3070 and the 930, what does that come out to? 4000. You do the same thing on the next one. If Seth was born in the year 33, was that 3870? He lived 912 years. He would have died in 2958, because again, we're subtracting numbers. If you say that he was born, counting from 0, in the year 130, and if he lived for 912 years, he died after 1042 years of humanity being on the earth, created in God's image and likeness, that would be 1042. And if you add 2958 to 1042, what do you come out to? 4000. So you can just check all the numbers down there and you'll see that this is accurate. Okay, so that has to do with the history. And again, as we go through more of it, you're going to see more and more of the history is correct. Now we're coming to the second point, which is the genetics. God tells us something so beautiful, so true, that genetically is provable, where there's a lot of other nonsense out there in the world that's just erroneous. A lot of it is pure racist, because he who wins the battle writes the story. The Europeans who descended from Japheth, in many cases, have won battles. They've written the history. And because of the racism that has been exhibited from a lot of the Japhethites, they have written the wrong story, okay? But let's go through the truth of the Bible. We're looking at the Bible, and then we're going to back it up with other things. So Adam and Eve and Noah and Shaloma, y'all didn't know that I knew the name of Noah's wife, did you? Yeah, not that one. No, not that one. He's not married. So, but I just came up with that name since Noah means rest. I'm thinking that his wife must have meant Shalom, since that means peace. But we have no idea what her name was. But anyway, Adam and Eve, Noah and his wife, and all of their descendants, including Shem, Ham, and Japheth, have a skin color that is a shade of brown. That is the truth from Scripture. Now we're going to see that because that's just words, me talking. But if you turn to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, you turn to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Here it says, Yahweh Elohim formed man, which is from the Hebrew word Adam. And if you look at Strong's exhaustive concordance, he numbers it H for Hebrew and then 120. But the Hebrew word is Adam. It means man. So Yahweh Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground. Now in Hebrew, that word ground is Adamah. Notice the similarity between man, Adam, and ground, Adamah, because God is saying that man came from the ground. What color is the ground? The ground is brown. So we're beginning to understand the genetics that God reveals in the scripture. And that comes from Strong's H127. And then it says he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So the root word for man, Adam, and ground, Adamah, for both of them is Adam. Just a different emphasis on the syllables. And that comes from H119, which means brown with a reddish undertone, similar to the look of the Ethiopians that you see in this picture. Okay? So we're seeing from Scripture, but we're not finished yet. We're seeing from Scripture that the original people were not what the Europeans painted as this lily white figure. What we're saying is that the original people were brown, and that all people are simply a shade of brown, going from very dark brown, middle brown, to light brown, but everyone is a shade of brown. Genetically, that can be proven, and from the Bible, we're seeing that that is true. All right, so if we look at this one, this asterisk, it says, so Jacob fed Esau red lentil soup. So if we think about that word red, right, that might conjure up a certain image in our minds, like these chair coverings that we have in here are red. Okay, but let's see what it's really talking about. So Jacob fed Esau red lentil soup. You can pull up a picture of red lentil soup to see what it looks like. Genesis chapter 25, verse 30. Genesis chapter 25, verse 30. Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with some of that red stew. And that word red comes from, again, H122, which is a dome. And that's root is from H119, which means brown with a reddish undertone. And then in Genesis chapter 25 and verse 34, it says, Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. So if we put the two verses together, it is red lentil stew. Okay, it's red lentil stew. Well, here's a picture of red lentil beans, and here's a picture of red lentil stew. Is that red? No. It's kind of orange. It's like that color, right? Similar to that color. So it's really brown with a reddish undertone, right?
You know what's interesting?
Yes.
Your Passover leavened bread, when you make leavened bread with olive oil, it looks like that color. It looks like me.
Right, exactly.
Darky, actually.
Right. When you make unleavened bread with olive oil, it turns out looking brown. Yeah.
That's the color, natural color. That bread looks like your.
Right. Now I want to note something. This is red, and when we look and say this is red, I'm talking about the word red. This is what red looks like. And this is from Microsoft's color palette. And this is brown. When I might say this is brown, the word brown is brown. Now, which one most closely matches the picture you see? Is it red or is it brown? It's brown, very similar in color. So even in the Bible, when you see the same word for the red lentil soup, that red lentil soup, the red beans are really brownish and the soup is really brown. It's the same root word for Adam, the same root word for the ground, the same root word here for red lentil stew. All of it points to brown. We're still not finished. If you go back now, and this is in, thank you, Numbers 19, verse 2. In Numbers 19, verse 2, it talks about the red heifer. Now, that word red is also from Edom, just like we saw H122 with red lentil soup. So, what do you think a red heifer is going to look like? Do you think it's going to look like when we think about red, like these chairs, or is it going to be brown? Well, we don't have to speculate. Yeah, you don't have to speculate. Okay. So, where it talks about a heifer, I'm going to pull up a video to see what a red heifer looks like. And this video is from the Temple Institute. These are Jews in Israel that's looking for a pure red heifer so that they can burn it, offer the ashes to purify and cleanse the temple. And look what they are going to show.
For 2,000 years, we've been waiting for a perfect red heifer, a parah adumah. You know, people think that finding a real red heifer is impossible. But the truth is, there are thousands of red cows throughout the world. Go to Google and search for images of red cows, and you'll see red Angus in America, you'll see Shetland in the Scottish Highlands, and you'll see red cattle in Norfolk Island, just to mention a few. There are many red cows throughout the world, and the challenge is not to find a particular red cow. The challenge is to raise a perfect red heifer according to the exact biblical requirements here in the land of Israel. Well, it's time to stop waiting and start doing. The Temple Institute has embarked upon an unprecedented historical project to raise a herd of red cows here in the land of Israel. After decades of intensive study and research, the Institute has partnered with an Israeli cattleman and, using state-of-the-art technique and under strict rabbinical supervision, we're going to raise a herd of red cows here in Israel. We're going to select a proper candidate from this herd for the fulfillment of the biblical requirements of the commandment of the red heifer. Make no mistake, this project is nothing less than the first stage of the reintroduction of biblical purity into the world, the prerequisite for the rebuilding of the Holy Temple.
Okay, so again, we don't have to speculate. I do want to show you one thing here. We're going to go back and look at this cow lying down, the cow in the background, and look at the dirt next to it. You notice the similarities, the brown cow, the brown dirt. And you look at the man's hand, that's a good point. That's not brown. And his shirt is white. So very good point. I didn't even really think about that observation. So it's, anybody who might be offended by what I'm saying, you need to check your own heart, you need to check your own mind, and you need to study the Bible closer so that you can come to correct understanding. Because perhaps you're the one who is racist. If this offends you, perhaps you're the one who is racist. If not that bad, you're biased simply because you've been fed incorrect information. And again, what I'm here to tell everybody, whether you're listening live or you're on Zoom, listening to this later, the Bible is accurate in history and in genetics. And then we're going to cover the future ones. So this is just one example, again, of the Bible being accurate. Okay, we're going to hear a video from Answers in Genesis. As many of you know, we went there 2 years ago to Kentucky to visit with them, a great trip. And here's another video talking about genetics.
One other thing, people say, okay, but then how do you get all the different races of people? Some people think that, oh, to get all the so-called races of people, God must have made different races to start with. Wait a minute. We're all descendants of one man and one woman. The gospel message is for every tribe and nation because we're all of one race, because we're all descendants of Adam, we're all sinners, and Jesus Christ became a member of the human race to die for the descendants of Adam. There can only be one race of people.
I hear this one a lot. How can there be so many races in the world if we are all descendants of Adam and Eve? Well, check this out. First off, let's talk about the word race. Sometimes when people use the word, they mean supposed races of people who have evolved at different times, rates, and in different locations. That's not true. Of course, the word race is also a term we use to distinguish between groups with different physical traits, namely skin color. But are there really different races? Take a gander at Acts 17:26, where it is written that God, from one man, made every nation of men. It's clear then that the Bible teaches that there is one race, the human race. The Bible is also clear that all people on the earth are descendants of Adam and Eve who were created by God. Check Genesis 1:26 through 28. Easy enough. God created two people in his image, male and female, and told them to increase in number. So Adam and Eve are mom and dad of the human race. Then their children had children, and those children had children, and so on and so forth for many generations until, according to Genesis 6:9, the world's population was reduced to 8 people who were protected inside an ark during a global flood. And those 8 people later walked off the ark, and according to Genesis 9:19, from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Oh, wait a second. What do I mean scattered? Well, jump over to Genesis 11 and let's talk about an event known as the Tower of Babel. Basically, because of the sinful actions of the descendants of Noah, the Lord confused their language and scattered them from there over all the earth. That's pretty clear and concise. Okay, so we've got lots of people who are descendants of the 8 folks who came off the ark, and now they have been scattered all over the earth. That explains that we are still one race and that different groups of people ended up in different locations. But how do we get a bunch of different colored people if we are all one race? Well, follow along. This, of course, is a simplified explanation, but the basic principles are true. We all have a pigment in our bodies called melanin, which, depending on different variables, produces different shades of the one main skin color we all possess. Several genes control the amount of melanin produced and thus the variability in the skin shade. In fact, it's easy for one couple to produce a wide range of skin shade variability in just one generation, as we'll see in just a moment. Time for a quick genetics lesson. DNA is the molecule of heredity that is passed from parents to children. A child inherits 23 chromosomes from each parent. Each chromosome pair contains hundreds of genes, which regulate the physical development of the child. However, to illustrate basic genetic principles pertaining to the topic, we'll just talk about 2 genes, the genes that control the production of melanin. So, let capital A and capital B symbolize versions of the gene that code for large amounts of melanin, while little a and little b code for small amounts. Got it? Easy. Check this out. Take a look at the upper left. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B genes, and mom contributes capital A, capital B genes as well. Together they will produce a child with capital A, capital B, and capital B. This is a kid with a lot of melanin, and thus he will have very dark skin. Easy to see. Here's the bigger point though. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B, and mom contributes little a and little b. Well, the child's skin will be middle brown shade, the combination of capital A, little a, and capital B, little b, which by the way represents a majority of the world's population. Not only that, but if each parent is capital A, capital B, little b, the combinations that could be produced in their children could result in a very wide range of skin shades in just one generation. So, since Adam and Eve were the first people ever, it makes sense to conclude that God placed in them a combination of genes that could produce all different shades of skin we see. Those same combinations would be present in Noah and the 7 other people who boarded the ark. And because God dispersed people at the Tower of Babel, he dispersed the population, thereby isolating gene pools in the different people groups. Over time, different cultures formed in different locations with certain features like skin shade becoming predominant. And here we are today. And since we all go back to Noah and his family, it makes sense that we are all different shades of brown. One race, multiple people groups, just like the Bible teaches. Simplified for sure, but enough said.
It's very easy to understand. That's why you find instances like this. These twins were born in Australia, one dark, one light. These twins were born in England, one dark, one light. When we have children, you know, we have 5 children, they all look a little different to each other. You know why? They all have different combinations of genes. But it all goes back to the original gene pool.
All right, so that should be simple. Again, we're on point 2 for genetics. But because I'm going to drive this point home, because there's so much racism in the world, so much misunderstanding, let's see a second video from this same group.
So uppercase letters will say represent the genetics for dark skin, lowercase letters the genetics for light skin. So if someone like my wife's parents is light skin, we can say, well, they must have all lowercase letters. They'd be of a light brown skin tone. That's the genetics. And if you use a Punnett square to say, well, what would their descendants look like? What sort of children could they produce? What does the DNA encode? You'll see that all they can produce is children with more lowercase letters, which means that I'll be light-skinned. So big surprise there, light-skinned people produce more light-skinned offspring. The same type of scenario works with dark-skinned peoples. For those of dark brown skin, they've got all capital letters. So to figure out what sort of offspring they could produce, you'd use the Punnett square again. And once again, you find that dark-skinned people produce children of dark-skin genetics. No surprise there. And if you followed our ministry, you know that what we've often emphasized, very rightly, is that if you have ancestors of a mixed genetic makeup, some uppercase letters, some lowercase letters, naturally this would mean that they are of a middle brown skin tone, you get some really surprising results. It's not surprising for those who've studied genetics, but it's surprising to our intuition. We're not used to thinking in these terms. So 2 parents who have a mix of uppercase letters and lowercase letters can produce a whole mix of shades of skin in 1 generation. They have tremendous genetic potential and can produce all the various shades you see here. So you'll notice that this particular Punnett square has 16 boxes. Most people don't have 16 children, though we have some of our colleagues, of course, at Answers in Genesis who are seemingly trying to get there. I have 4. This type of potential exists in these people. And an example, a more tangible example of what this type of person might look like, comes from families today in which one of the parents is of one ethnicity, let's say light skin, and one is of darker skin, a different ethnicity. Their children, basically by definition, are going to be of a mixed genetic makeup. The children shown here, you see, are of a skin tone between that of their parents, and they're going to have a mix of these uppercase and lowercase letters. So if you have Adam and Eve, who have this sort of genetic makeup, if you have Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives, who have this sort of genetic makeup, if you have this sort of potential at the start of the humanity, at the beginning of creation, or after the flood with Noah and his family and at Babel, you have the potential to produce every type of ethnicity known to man. I want to apply it to a very simple modern scenario. So I've discussed my wife. Let me change that question once more. So we've already got maybe some indirect evidence that she might have a dark-skinned ancestor given her hair tone. What about me? I've got straight hair, light skin. Both my parents have straight hair, light skin. Is there any chance that in the recent past, I might have a dark-skinned ancestor? And I'm going to think this through with the genetics we just discussed, but again, apply them in a new way that perhaps people aren't used to thinking about. So because I'm light-skinned, presumably the rest of the members of my family tree would also be light-skinned. And I'm asking the question, could there be one of the branches that has a dark-skinned person? We want to explore this particular hypothesis, scenario. So let's begin with the next generation, looking at this union right here, this dark-skinned man, presumably because he's in my family tree, his spouse would be light-skinned. What would their offspring look like? And essentially, it's similar to the image of that family we just saw. You have someone with all capital letters, dark-skinned person, marrying someone of all lowercase letters, they're light-skinned. What would their children look like? Well, mom can only pass on the information for light skin, dad only the information for dark skin. And so all of their children will be middle brown, a mix of uppercase letters and lowercase letters. And again, it's like the child we just observed of a skin tone in between her parents. So that's the next generation. We can derive what they would have looked like. They would have been middle brown. They have a mix of genetic letters. Let's take it now 1 generation further to see what happens. So now we're talking about this generation. We've already derived what the husband would look like, middle brown skin, uppercase letters and lowercase letters. What about the wife? Well, again, in my family tree, I've said there's presumably most of the people are of light skin. And so his spouse on this family tree would again be of light skin, all lowercase letters. So this middle brown individual marries a light-skinned individual. There's their genetic makeup. You use the Punnett score to figure out what those children look like. You can fill in these 16 boxes here. And what you see is that there are a range of skin tones. So it's not quite as extreme in terms of the potential as two people of middle brown skin marry, but there's still a variety that's present here. On the left, you've got middle brown skin and it gets progressively lighter to the right side. 50% of the children, though, the highest probability is to have a slightly lighter brown skin tone, 1 capital letter and 3 lowercase letters. So I'm going to take this person as the most likely outcome of that union. Let's now take it the next generation further, down to here. So I've said we're now at a lighter skin tone, not light like me, but lighter than middle brown. They've got 1 capital letter, 3 lowercase letters. Who are they going to marry? On this side of the tree, you again have light-skinned people. So spouse again is light-skinned, but the other side of the family tree of this union is a little bit darker skin. If you do the Punnett square here and figure out what their offspring would have looked like, you'll see that you basically have 2 possibilities. Half the children will be all light-skinned, half will be just a little bit darker. So in just a few generations, you can see that we go from a very dark-skinned person to someone whose skin is as light as mine. So basic genetics tells us that it's entirely possible, even though I have straight hair, typical Caucasian features, just a few generations ago, I may have had a dark-skinned ancestor. So just to see what this looks like generation to generation, let's watch what happens in sort of fast forward at each branch of this family tree, each generation. So this gentleman, dark skin, presumably each of his parents were dark skinned, so that's what he would look like. He'd be one of these boxes here. But then he marries a light skinned individual, so the next generation is middle brown, and you keep at each generation getting lighter and lighter, so that in 4 to 5 generations, you have a high chance of being entirely light skinned.
Okay. Now that should make so much sense. And I'm going to give you a real life example. In my family, my grandparents were dark skinned, both of them. Then they had my mom. My mom married my dad lighter shade than I am. And so then you have my sister coming out between my father and my mother, darker than what I am now, but not quite as dark as my mom. Then she married someone light skinned from Barbados. And so their child is light skinned, lighter, way lighter than me. And then he married somebody who I think is from El Salvador. And so if you look at their child now, their child looks like a typical European type person. So we've gone from very dark grandfather, that's one generation, grandfather, grandmother, mother, father, my sister, my nephew, and then I guess a great nephew. 5 generations going from dark brown skin to light brown skin in my own family. So exactly what he was saying is true. And you can see that through genetics. Now we're going to do this. I did this last week, but I just want to run through it very quickly. If we look at the middle one, this represents Adam and Eve, or it could represent Noah and Shaloma, if that was her name. And you can see that they were middle brown, both of them, because they have Adam and uppercase A, lowercase a, uppercase B, lowercase b, and so did Eve. Or if this is Noah and Shaloma, you can see the same thing. She has uppercase A, uppercase B, lowercase b, where the uppercase, as you can see, is in black and the lowercase is in white, showing that it's the middle. So if we go over to the far left on this row, if Noah contributed an uppercase A, Shaloma contributed uppercase A, Noah contributed uppercase B, and Shaloma contributed uppercase B, they would have a child who's darker than them. Even though they're middle brown, they're going to have a child darker than them. Let's go to the next person. So Noah contributes in uppercase A, Shaloma contributes in uppercase A, Noah contributes in uppercase B, Shaloma contributes a lowercase b. So this person is going to be darker than Noah and Shaloma, but lighter than the gentleman over to the far left. Then if you look over to the right, Noah contributes a lowercase a, Shaloma contributes a lowercase a, Noah contributes a uppercase b, and Shaloma contributes a lowercase b. So three lower cases. That means that this person to the right is going to be lighter than Noah and Shaloma, and also obviously therefore lighter than their two siblings over to the left. And then the far right, the person in the blonde hair, if you have Noah contributing a lowercase a, Shaloma contributing a lowercase a, Noah contributing a lowercase b, and Shaloma contributing a lowercase b, so all lowercase, from Noah and Shaloma, they're going to have a child that's very light skinned. And so we saw in one of the videos where it showed parents having a very dark skinned child, and these are twins, somebody over to the far left, and having someone who's very light skinned, the one over to the far right. That's because the parents had to have passed on different genes. For the darker one, all the uppercase; for the lighter one, all of the lowercase. Now, if you look at the top row, if Adam and Eve started out as all lowercase, both of them had all lowercase, they would be able only to contribute lowercase, and everybody throughout history would have remained very, very light, unless you come up with this racist theory that Cain that killed Abel, he was cursed, and his curse is he got black skin. Or if you want to say that Ham was cursed, and therefore Ham, because that represents darker skinned people, that all dark skinned people, or Ham turned dark skin, and all dark skinned people are cursed. Both are racist, both are erroneous, has nothing to do with biblical truth. It's just whoever writes the story writes what they want, and we know who's won most of the battles in recent history. Okay, if you look at the bottom one, if you say, well, Adam and Eve, or Noah and Shaloma, they were both really, really dark skinned, and all they had was uppercase letters, then obviously they would have only been able to contribute uppercase letters, and everybody would have remained dark skinned. And then you have some racists on the other hand who say that, I think it was Haman, they say he was cursed with leprosy, and that's where all of the lighter skinned people come from. That's obviously racist in reverse. Neither is true. What is true from a genetic standpoint, what we've seen from scripture, is Adam and Eve were brown skinned people, like the dust of the ground, like the red heifer, like red lentil soup, and the ground is brown. And so they would have been this middle brown shade, but because of our phenomenal creators, they created this thing that's called genetics, and we have genes, and there's certain genes that control melanin, and they ingeniously put into Adam and Eve, Noah and Shaloma, the genes that allow for there to be all shades of brown. So we're all one race, everybody's a different shade of brown. That is supposed to symbolize travel. So now we're going to point 3, geographically. The Bible is the most accurate book that you can find. So Noah's sons were Shem, he would have been middle brown, Ham, the dark brown, and Japheth, the light brown. Now, when you look at geography, you look at Shem's descendants stayed in Asia, or what today is called the Middle East, except for Lud, who went over to a land inhabited by Japheth. You can see that Ham inhabited Africa, what we know as Africa today. and I don't know if people know this, but on the continental shelf of Africa is the land of Canaan. So Israel is in Africa. All right. We can pause there. I don't know how many people knew that. It's not just that Ham, through his descendants, one of them being Canaan, populated that land. It is just historically a fact that the continental shelf of Africa goes up to where we see. So Israel literally is in Africa, as well as Egypt is in Africa. So anyway, but then you have the Japhethites. And the Japhethites, you can see that they went primarily into Europe and even above what we're seeing. If you go between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, if you go through there where Magog is, that goes up into Asia. And then over to the left is Russia. Okay. So let's pause just for a second to kind of get some of these names in our mind. Let's start with Shem. Shem had Aram, Asher, Arphaxad, Elam, and Lud. Those are all the ones that's in the greenish kind of color. And then for Ham, you had Put, Mizraim, Cush, and Canaan. And for Japheth, you had, and if I forgot Lud, then forgive me for forgetting Lud for Shem. But anyway, for Japheth, you have Gomer, Tyrus, Javan, Magog, Meshach, Tubal, and Madai. So those are the children. Now, think about this from a geographic standpoint. We're talking about everybody starting with a middle shade of brown, but then at the Tower of Babel, people being scattered throughout the earth and people being primarily in their ethnic groups. So what happened? Shem being the middle brown, which is the shade of brown of most people in the world, they stayed in what's called Asia, or today the Middle East. You see Ham, the darker skinned people went to Africa. The darker brown people went to Africa. And then you see the lightest shade of brown people going into Northern Asia, East Asia, and then West Asia, and all the way into Europe. So again, from a genetic and a geographic standpoint, we know that the Bible is correct. And if we look here to see between the Black Sea, you look it up yourself, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea is a place called the Caucasus Mountains. And I'm taking this from Wikipedia. The Caucasus Mountains is a mountain range in Asia at the intersection of Asia and Europe. It stretches between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So what happened with the peoples after the ark landed on Mount Ararat in Turkey? The Bible says that people moved eastward to the land of Shinar. The land of Shinar is where you see Iraq is today. So that would have been the Tower of Babel. That's where you get Babylon from. Babylon is in Iraq, and Babylon takes the name from the Tower of Babel or Babel. So they moved here into the land of Shinar, which is known as Asia. Okay. So what did Japheth do? Japheth left from Asia and crossed the Caucasus Mountains, and they became known as Caucasians. Caucasians, because these people that dwelt in Asia crossed the Caucasus Mountains. So they are called Caucasians. So we have the descendants of Japheth being the Caucasian people today. They're not Israelites in whole. If you believe in the nonsense about the United States and Britain being the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh, well, that's just, again, a racist theory that crept into the worldwide Church of God, but it wasn't some divine revelation that Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong received, because there were plenty of books out before he came and adopted this racist theory. One of them was Joseph's Birthright and Ephraim's Birthright and Joseph's Scepter. That was a book that predated the one that Mr. Armstrong wrote, and he borrowed a lot of stuff from that particular book. So British Israelism has been around for a long time, prior to Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong. And it's always been a racist theory. And not only what we're covering today, showing that the Japhethites are the ones who are the Europeans, not the Israelites. Um, in addition to showing this today, there's plenty of other things in the scripture. I have some videos about that also on YouTube if you want to check those out, and it's talking about Israel. So if you just do a search on the Christian Ambassadors YouTube channel and look for Israel, you'll see some that shows stuff about Israel and debunking the theory, the racist theory about Ephraim and Manasseh are the descendants, or United States and Britain are the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh. And again, don't get mad and run out if you're listening to this live. You've just been taught something that's in error, and you need to sit and learn so that you can be educated instead of ignorant on this particular message. Okay, so then if we look at Revelation chapter 1, verse 4, Revelation chapter 1, verse 4, just to show you that where they went, leaving from Asia, going to the Caucasus Mountains, which is between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, crossing over, and that becomes northern Asia, and then going further left. You see in John, and John is writing in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 4, says, John to the 7 congregations in Asia. Asia, where were the 7 congregations? It's in Western Turkey. So Western Turkey is considered a part of Asia until you get to this break in the landmass that you can cross over. And then the rest of Turkey, where Istanbul is in Europe. Now, we went for the feast last year to Turkey, and we saw that. We were in Istanbul. That is Asia. You cross the Bosphorus Strait, and you can do that on the bridge, and you're in Asia. I think it's a true statement that, like Russia and Turkey, I think, are the only 2 countries that straddle both Asia and Europe. I believe that's a true statement. But anyway, if it's not at least those 2 countries, they both, as a part of their country, some of it's in Europe, some of it's in Asia. But the point is, after you get above the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, crossing over the Caucasus Mountains, that goes into northern Asia, and then over to the left is Europe. And so you have Japhethites crossing over the Caucasus Mountains from Asia. So they were called Caucasians. That's where you get the lightest skinned people. The darkest skinned people are in Africa, and then the middle brown people are in what we call the Middle East. And that's the majority of people if you look at the world's population. Okay, now I use Copilot, which is from Microsoft. This is AI. So don't be scared of AI. Sometimes it can give you some good stuff. So this says, hello, this is Bing. I'm the new AI-powered chat mode of Microsoft Bing that can help you quickly get information about the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You can put that in yourself. So Shem in Hebrew means name. Shem was Noah's oldest son and one of the 8 family members who survived the great flood. Then after the flood, Shem became the father of 5 sons who went on to become the ancestors of various Semitic nations in the ancient Near East. And then the Semitic nations include Elam, that's one of his sons, who settled northeast of the Persian Gulf. So the Elamites combined with the descendants of Madai, which is from Japheth, they most likely are the ones who are the ancestors of the Persians. So a mixture of Semitic people and Japhetic people, most likely the progenitors of the Persians. And that's Iran. So Asher, the biblical name for Assyria, and that's the settlement between the Euphrates and Tigris River. This is not Syria, but Assyria. And then you have Arphaxad. He settled in Chaldea. And so you know that Arphaxad was, I think, the great-grandfather or grandfather of Abraham. Then Abraham's father was Tahor. And then Abraham descended from this line of Arphaxad. And so Abraham was in Ur the Chaldees. So that's where Arphaxad was. That's modern day Iraq. So as people dispersed from Babylon after the Tower of Babel, Arphaxad stayed in that area. And that's why Abraham was called out of Ur the Chaldees, out of Babylon. He was called into the promised land. That's very significant. Then you had Lud. Lud settled in Asia Minor, which is Western Turkey. That's what we saw, with some migrating to Northern Africa. And then you have Aram, the biblical name for Syria, located north and east of Israel. And Aramaic is where you get this language that was spoken by Israelites in the time of Yeshua. Okay, then we go to Ham. Ham in Hebrew means hot or black. And that was Noah's second oldest son. Ham and his wife bore 4 sons who became the father of various African nations. Ham's 4th son, Canaan, was prophetically cursed because he did something evil to Noah while Noah was drunk. And we're going to go into prophecy because that's one of the 5 points, the 5th point that we're covering today. So the curse meant that Canaan would lose his land to the Hebrews and become subservient to the descendants of Shem. Now, the 4 nations of Ham were Cush, settled in Ethiopia, south of Egypt, and some migrated to an area north of the Persian Gulf. So again, even with the Persians, you have some who were mixed with Japhethites through Madai, some were mixed with Shemites through Elam, and some were mixed with Cushites from Ham. So the Persians are a mixture of all 3 groups. At Cush also, the Cushites settled not only in Ethiopia, but also in Sudan and Uganda. That's also known as Nubia, if you study that. So then you have Mizraim, the Bible name for Egypt, that's in northeastern Africa. And if you visit Egypt today, my wife and I visited Egypt 3 times now, you'll see that they still have MIZR, the Bank of MIZR, because they understand that they come from Mizraim. It's not a mystery. Okay, and then when you look at Put settled in northern Africa, sometimes translated as Libya, and most people also believe that Put settled in India, and that's where you get the dark-skinned people from India and Sri Lanka, for instance, and Bangladesh, etc. Then you have Canaan settled in northern Africa, and that's east of the Mediterranean, is later given to the Hebrews. All right. And then you have Japheth. And again, this is not me writing this, okay? I want us to understand this. Japheth in Hebrew means God will enlarge. No, this was Noah's 3rd oldest son. And then this is just from Copilot and Bing. The 7 nations of Japheth are Gomer. Gomer, and you can see on the map also where these people are located. So the 7 nations of Japheth are Gomer. They settled north of the Black Sea, and later his descendants likely occupied Germany, France, Spain, and the British Isles. So Gomer not only went from where you see on the map, he went westward after crossing over the Caucasus Mountains as a part of the Japhethites, went westward and settled in what became known as Germany, France, Spain, and the British Isles. And Gomer, one of his children, is named Ashkenaz. And what do we know about Ashkenaz? We always hear about the Ashkenazi Jews. Why? Because Ashkenaz became the progenitor of the Germans. So you have Gomer, one of his sons was Ashkenaz. They are the progenitors of the Germanic people. And that's why when you find the Jews in Germany, they're called Ashkenazi Jews because they're in the land populated by Ashkenaz, one of the descendants of Gomer. Okay, then you have Magog, that's associated with the Russians and the Scythians, Madai linked to the Medes, Javan referring to the Greeks and the Romans, Tubal possibly related to the Iberians, and that's the people from Spain and Portugal, and in ancient times, that's called Iberia. Then you have Meshech associated with the Georgians and Armenians. You can see where that is, not Georgians as where we are now in good old Georgia, headquarters, Atlanta. We're talking about Georgia in Europe. Okay, so then Tyrus, perhaps the Thracians and the Persians. So more integration with the Persians. Now, look at what this says here. Again, I did not write this myself. And all of this information is so readily available. It's just unfortunately anybody who came into a knowledge of the truth, and there was so much good truth. Anyone who came into knowledge of the truth through the Worldwide Church of God, unfortunately, was taught a grievous error that the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh are United States and Britain, and that gave rise to a lot of racism within the Worldwide Church of God, and that, of course, should be smashed because that's not of God. So Japheth's descendants spread out over some of Asia and all of Europe, and through colonization, and I'm going to add terrorization because they were terrorists coming to kill people, coming to rape people, coming to steal from people, exploitation. So terrorization and exploitation. But again, whoever writes the story, they write their version, so they kind of sanitize it with the word colonization, but think the truth, they were terrorists, exploitative people. So they spread to North America, and this fulfilled Noah's prediction of enlargement for Japheth, because his name means God will enlarge. So they spread all over the place. And that was God's doing. All right, so in summary, Shem's line gave rise to the Israelites, Assyrians, Babylonians, and others. Ham's line included the Egyptians, Canaanites, and more. And Japheth's descendants populated Europe. The biblical account of these three sons provides a rich tapestry of human history and cultural diversity. Now we're going on to linguistics to show that linguistically we can prove even from the Bible the truths about where people come from. So note, there's two different maps here. One is going to be pointing to an Afro-Asiatic area. Please note it's called Afro-Asiatic. That's the area that we're going to be looking at. And it's the same as the Semitic area. We're going to see this on the map. So Afro-Asiatic is associated with Semitic. I didn't draw these maps. You go online and you can find this, just tracing the languages of people in the world. So I'm going to blow this up so you can see it, because even with my glasses on, I can't see this. Okay, so over to the left, you see the, what do they call this? The legend. They call this the legend. And we're just going to look at the Afro-Asiatic one. The Afro-Asiatic one is this one in green. And look where they're talking about. The languages that are spoken are Afro-Asiatic. It's Northern Africa, of course, down to here, which is Yemen, Ethiopia, right, Somalia, all that area. And then look where we're talking about. Saudi Arabia, Dubai, et cetera, all the way up to, of course, the land of Canaan. So that's the Afro-Asiatic languages. Keep that picture in mind. Now, also, when we look at all of the blue, what does this legend say? It says Indo-European. It does not say Semitic. Semitic languages are not spoken in these blue areas as the major language group. And we look and we see where the Europeans are today. They are in North America, which includes Canada. A lot of them, because of the colonization, exploitation, terrorism, dominated, wiped out a lot of the Aztec Indians and other Indians, and populated Mexico, and even in South America, which is especially true in Argentina, where they really wiped out the native populations and replaced them with Europeans, a lot of them being Nazis from Germany. But then you also see Europe and Asia, which is Russia. They all speak an Indo-European language. And then you see India, which is interesting because that's where the word Indo comes from. Indo, from the Indus Valley, that's India. And then you see over to the far right and bottom, that's Australia, and further is New Zealand. That's the Indo-European descendants of Japheth, all right, where the Semitic, the Afro-Asiatic, are the descendants of both Ham and Shem. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the other map. Keep those places in mind. Now I'm going to look at the other map very quickly. Whoops, that wasn't it. Click the wrong one. Yep.
No.
I think it's,
No.
it's this one. Thank you. So now we look at this map. Keep in mind where we just saw the Afro-Asiatic. Now when we look at this map, we see the Semitic is black. Semitic is black. Is that not the same area? That was the Afro-Asiatic, same area. Now something that's interesting, look at the Germanic language. Look at the Germanic language. Lots of the same places, right? That were the Indo-European. Think about the English language. The English language is a Germanic language. Yeah, most people don't know that. Look it up. The English language is a Germanic language. It tells you in the dictionary. I mean, just look it up. There's not some mystery. It's not a Semitic language. It's not like the descendants of Israel came and populated Britain and then spread to America and kept their same language. That's just a lie. What happened is Japhethites, who speak the Indo-European language, they're the ones who came across from, first of all, you can see above the yellow where you'll see Spain and Portugal, and then Italy and France. Above there is Germany. That's Germany in red. Above there is where you have Sweden and Norway. And then over to the left is where you have the British Isles and also Ireland and Scotland, Wales. And then you come to the far left, that's America, North America. That's the Germanic language. And just look it up. Think about the word welcome, welcome and welcome in Germanic language as an example. And there's plenty of other words that are Germanic. Okay, when you get to the Saxons, the Angles and the Saxons, Anglo-Saxon, Saxons are from Germany. Again, look it up. The Saxons are German people, Germanic people. You look it up. The British people, the Saxons, are Germanic people. They're not, and that means they're from Japheth, not from Shem. So I think that's enough of that. If you want to learn more, then go and learn more. But what we're presenting is the truth. Okay, so now we're getting into the prophetic. This is the last point. We're getting into the prophetic. So Shem, you can see that his birth year was 2442. He lived for 600 years, and therefore he died in 1842. So we're just continuing the history, but here's some prophecy, okay? And what I have over to the right is just talking about Noah was 500 years old. This is in Genesis 5:32 when he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then in Genesis chapter 11, 10 and 11, Shem was 100 years old when he became the father of Arphaxad. 2 years after the flood, Shem lived 500 years after. He became the father of Arphaxad, and so we know he died when he was 600. Okay. Shortly after the flood, when Noah's sons began to repopulate the earth, a prophecy was uttered that had a monumental effect on world history. So let's look at Genesis chapter 9, and we're going to read verses 18 through 27. It's Genesis chapter 9 and verses 18 through 27. Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 through 27. The sons of Noah who went out from the ship were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. I have this in bright red for a reason, because he's highlighted. Ham is the father of Canaan. It doesn't say anything about Shem or Japheth, who their children are in this particular case, but it does say Ham is the father of Canaan, because Canaan is the focus of this scripture, not Ham. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. Noah began to be a farmer and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and got drunk. He was uncovered within his tent, meaning he was lying naked. Ham, the father of Canaan, again pointing to Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his brothers outside. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it on both their shoulders, went in backwards, and covered the nakedness of their father. Consequently, they didn't see their father's nakedness. Noah woke from his drunkenness and knew what his grandson, is the proper translation, had done to him. Therefore, he said, Canaan is cursed. The focus is Canaan. He will be a servant of servants. And again, the proper thing is to his uncles. If you look in the Bible, there's no word for uncle, there's no word for niece or nephew or aunt. So the Bible uses a generic term as a brother, but more accurately, because it's focusing on Canaan, and to help us to understand, it is the word uncles. In verse 26, he said, blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's servant. And then in verse 27, notice it is Canaan who's cursed, and the curse is let Canaan be Shem's servant. And may God enlarge Japheth, which we previously saw. But here's a critical thing to understand this. Let Japheth dwell in the tents of Shem. So that means Japheth is going to occupy the place where Shem is, because he's dwelling in the tents of Shem. He's going to take over, occupy the place where Shem lives. Where did Shem live? Shem lived in Canaan. That's the promise to Shem's descendants when this prophecy was fulfilled. So may God enlarge Japheth, let him dwell in the tents of Shem, Shem's descendants. Let Canaan be Japheth's servant. So that's a double curse, if you want to say, or the curse has two layers. Canaan became a servant of Shem, but also because it says in verse 25, therefore he said, Canaan is cursed, he will be a servant of servants. So that means Shem is going to be a servant to somebody, and whoever he's a servant of will also be a servant to somebody else. So he's a servant to someone else who's a servant. All right. And then we see in verse 26, let Canaan be Shem's servant, which means that Shem had to be a servant of someone else. Who was Shem a servant of? His brother Japheth. And so it says in verse 26, he said, blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem, let Canaan be Shem's servant. And then in verse 27, may God enlarge Japheth, let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be Japheth's servant. So we know because Canaan was a servant of servants, he was a servant to Shem, and Shem was also a servant, and Shem was a servant to Japheth. All right. It had the effect I was hoping it had. People who were asleep looked up. So anyway, we're going to go really, really quickly through this. The chart of the descendants of Shem, and I know this is small, but again, you can blow it up. I'm not going to blow it. The first level is obviously Noah. That's in the fuchsia color. The second level for all of them will be Shem, Japheth, and Ham, or Japheth, Shem, and Ham, as it's reading here. That's in kind of the light brown. And then the next level down is the yellow. And then the next level down is the green. And then you have a final level, which is more the purple. So let's go through it real quickly. Japheth. Japheth, if you look, had Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras. And I'm telling us for a reason, because we're going to see more of this prophecy. And then Gomer had Ashkenaz and Ripha and Togarmah. All right. When you go over to the second level, it's Japheth. You go to the third level, Gomer, Magog, Madai, and Javan. You look at Javan. Javan is the ancestor of Elisha. Yes.
Can you move your mouth so I can see- so we can see?
Okay, yes, I can do that much. So that's Elisha. And then there's, so whatever that name is, and then Kittim and Roadim. So what we're going to see next is looking at Elisha and Tarshish and Kittim, and above there is Javan. The main one is Javan, and we know that comes from Japheth. So Japheth, obviously these descendants of Japheth, Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, whatever that is, Kittim, they are going to be the ones that dwell in the tents of Shem. When you look at Shem, if you go down for Shem, there's Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, specifically the descendants of Arphaxad, which leads downward to Selah, Eber, Hebrews, and then Peleg, and then it goes down Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the Israelites all the way down to Yeshua. And then when you get over to the right, there is Ham on this second level. And then under Ham, there's Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The one we're going to focus on is Canaan, because if you go over to the far right, and then you go down, Canaan's descendants are the Sidonians, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgazites, the Hivites, even going down another one, the Archites, the Sinites, the Valadites, the Zamorites, and the Hamathites. All of these are the descendants of Canaan, and they were in the land of Canaan. And so we're going to see this all play out in history. Okay. All right. So around 1410 BC, this is the prophetic. It was a prophecy back in Genesis chapter 9. In history, this is how it's fulfilled. Around 1410 BC, Joshua led the Israelites, who are descendants of Shem through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joshua led the Israelites into the land of Canaan. Shem, through his descendants, the Israelites, conquered the Canaanites and thus fulfilled the first part of the prophecy, i.e., Canaan became a servant to one of his uncles, namely Shem. Very simple. And then the second part of the fulfillment is around 332 BC. The Greeks, descendants of Japheth through Javan and two of his sons, Elisha and Kittim, led by Alexander the Great, conquered Judea. And then after Alexander's death, his empire was split amongst four generals, with the two most prominent ones being Ptolemy in the south and the Seleucid and Seleucus in the north. Their descendants ruled Judea until about 141 BC. And then around 63 BC, the Romans, also descendants of Japheth through Javan and Tarshish, led by General Pompey, conquered Judea. The Romans ruled Judea until about 476 AD. Japheth, through the Greeks and the Romans, conquered Shem and dwelt in the tents of Shem because they stayed in the land of Israel. So they conquered Shem, the Israelites, thus fulfilling the second part of the prophecy, i.e., Shem became a servant to his brother Japheth. And so therefore the prophecy was fulfilled in these two stages. Canaan became a servant to his uncle Shem, and then Shem became a servant to his brother Japheth, and therefore Canaan became a servant of servants to his uncles. I hope that's clear. Now we're going to see just a little bit more about how terrible it was to have these Japhethites, who are the Europeans, doing what they always have done: terrorize places, exploit places that they go to, trying to wipe people out. And this is Antiochus Epiphanes, who persecuted the Jews. Okay, so we're going to view this. This is a short video, and then we got one more.
All right, so we're still in the midst of the Greek period, but we need to pause and take a look at Antiochus Epiphanes because he's super important for what follows. So again, we said in the last video that Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes, becomes one of the greatest threats Israel has ever known. So what happened was, after he got out of Roman prison and he came back and he followed his father and became king of the Seleucids, the empire was weak, and so he sought to secure and unify the kingdom through strict Hellenization. And so he would call himself Epiphanes, which meant God revealed, but the people called him Epimanes, meaning madman, because Antiochus Epiphanes was intense and he was very crazy, but he was powerful and he was a threat. So even though the Seleucid kingdom, they finally have the victory over the Ptolemies that they have been fighting for decades to try and accomplish, the empire was nearly broke, and they were threatened terribly by the growing threat that was the Roman Empire. So in order to try and unify and strengthen his kingdom, Antiochus robs temples for their treasures in order to sell them and to earn revenue for his fractured and weak empire. He also increased taxation on the people. Another thing he did was that he sold the office of the high priest, which was the most sacred office in Judaism, to the highest bidder. And this, of course, heavily angered the Jews. He also, through trying to strictly Hellenize Jerusalem, he tried to turn Jerusalem into a Greek city, including all kinds of things, like Olympic Games. He tried to force Jewish youth to become Greek. So Alexander the Great's Hellenization was much lighter. It was more affirming, whereas Antiochus's Hellenization was much more assimilation. He was trying to rid the world of Judaism and force Jerusalem to become a Greek center. And what happens next is that after he stopped in Rome, he goes down. Remember, Alexandria is the center of the Ptolemaic Empire. Now that Antiochus IV is in charge, he tries to overtake Alexandria, which is now not really being controlled by the Ptolemies as much as it's being controlled by Rome. But he goes down there to try and overtake it, and he is stopped. He stopped shamefully, and what happens is he is forced to retreat back up through Jerusalem, through Israel, and he vents his anger on Jerusalem. And what I want to do is I want to read to you a quote that comes from the Zondervan International Bible Backgrounds Commentary, because this just says it. It just says it so well. So here's what happens. Antiochus was determined to make sure that Palestine was loyal to himself in order to act as a buffer state between himself and the Romans. Considering himself Zeus Epiphanes, he ordered a cultic Hellenization policy in Palestine. Antiochus sent his soldier Apollonius with 22,000 soldiers who came under the pretense of peace, and they attacked Jerusalem on the Sabbath, knowing that Orthodox Jews would not fight, and he killed many people. Women and children were taken as slaves. The city was plundered and burned. Shortly afterward, in 167, Antiochus determined to exterminate the Jewish religion by forbidding the people to live in accordance with their ancestral laws. He forbade the observance of the Sabbath, customary festivals, traditional sacrifices, and the circumcision of children, and he ordered that the copies of the Torah must be destroyed. Idolatrous altars were set up, and the Jews were commanded to offer unclean sacrifices and to eat swine's flesh. Anyone who disobeyed any of these orders was sentenced to death. The climactic, infamous deed, though, was on December 16th, or Kislev, as they would have called it, 16th, 167, when the temple in Jerusalem, as well as the Samaritan temple at Mount Gerizim, became the place of worship for the Olympian Zeus, offering swine's flesh on the altar of Zeus, which was erected on the altar of a burnt offering. All of this, though, was a big mistake on Antiochus's part. He wanted to consolidate his empire around the Hellenic culture and religion, thinking that the Jewish religious eccentricities were loyal to the Ptolemaic dynasty. He never realized the significance of the Jewish religion, and his actions sparked the Maccabean Revolution. It's a long quote, but it says it perfectly what he did and what happened as a result. And here's a famous painting about this event. This is what's known as the Abomination of Desolation, what Antiochus did to eradicate, to demoralize, and to destroy Judaism. But what he did instead was he caused one of the greatest Jewish revolutions in history.
Okay, so that's one. That was the Greeks. Now we're going to go to the Romans, because the Romans also committed the abomination of desolation.
Titus, the son of the Roman Emperor Vespasian, who was in command of the 4-month siege of Jerusalem, ordered his entire army to prepare to storm the temple at dawn. A total of 60,000 Roman legionaries and local auxiliaries were eager to deliver the final blow to the defiant but broken city. Within the walls, 500,000 starving Jews survived in diabolical conditions. Some were fanatical religious zealots, some were freebooting bandits, but most were innocent families with no escape from this magnificent death trap. Titus set about reducing Jerusalem with systematic efficiency and overwhelming force. The Jews fought for every inch with almost suicidal abandon. As the blistered and jagged hills sprouted forests of fly-blown crucified cadavers, the city within was tormented by a sense of impending doom, intransigent fanaticism, whimsical sadism, and searing hunger. Yet the rebels were still fighting. Although Titus was proving to be a gifted commander and a popular son of the new emperor, Vespasian's unproven dynasty depended on victory over the Jewish rebels. Jerusalem was, Josephus observed, like a wild beast gone mad, which, for want of food, fell now upon eating its own flesh. The Romans fought back and pushed the Jews into the temple itself. One legionary, seized with a divine fury, grabbed some burning materials and lit the curtains and frame of a golden window linked to the rooms around the actual temple. By morning, the fire had spread to the very heart of holiness. The Jews, seeing the flames licking the Holy of Holies and threatening to destroy it, made a great clamor and ran to prevent it. But it was too late. They barricaded themselves in the inner court, then watched in aghast silence. Thousands of civilians and rebels mustered on the steps of the altar, waiting to fight to the last, or just die hopelessly. All had their throats cut by the exhilarated Romans, until around the altar lay dead bodies heaped one upon another, with the blood running down the steps. 10,000 Jews died in the burning temple. The cracking of vast stones and wooden beams made a sound like thunder. Josephus watched the death of the temple. The roar of the flames streaming far and wide mingled with the groans of the falling victims, and owing to the height of the hill and the mass of the burning pile, one would have thought the whole city was ablaze. And then the din, nothing more deafening or appalling could be conceived than that. There were the war cries of the Roman legions sweeping onward, the howls of the rebels encircled by fire and swords, the rush of the people who, cut off above, fled panic-stricken only to fall into the arms of the foe, and their shrieks as they met their fate. You would have thought the Temple Hill was boiling over from its base, being everywhere one mass of flame. Mount Moriah, where King David had placed the Ark of the Covenant, and where his son Solomon had built the first temple, was seething hot, full of fire on every part of it, while inside, dead bodies covered the floors. Now the rampaging Romans, seeing that the inner temple was destroyed, grabbed the gold and furniture, carrying out their swag before they set fire to the rest of the complex. Titus decided to eradicate Jerusalem, a decision which Josephus blamed on the rebels. The rebellion destroyed the city and the Romans destroyed the rebellion. This final, desperate struggle would decide not only the fate of the city and her inhabitants, but also the future of Judaism and the small Jewish cult of Christianity, and even, looking forward across 6 centuries, the shape of Islam. The destruction was also decisive for Christianity. Jerusalem's small Christian community, led by Simon, Jesus' cousin, had escaped from the city before the Romans closed in. Even though there were many non-Jewish Christians living around the Roman world, these Jerusalemites had remained a Jewish sect praying at the temple. But now the temple had been destroyed, the Christians believed that the Jews had lost the favor of God. The followers of Jesus separated forever from the mother faith, claiming to be the rightful heirs to the Jewish heritage. Christians envisaged a new celestial Jerusalem, not a shattered Jewish city.
Okay, so a lot to unpack in there, but we're not going to go through all that. Just to show that, again, you have the Canaanites becoming servants of Shem, the Israelites, because Israel went into the land of Canaan and they took over, it became the promised land. And then while the Israelites were there, under the Greeks and the Romans, they came in and they took over Israel. And those Greeks and Romans are descendant of Japheth. So therefore, Canaan became a servant of servants because Canaan became a servant of Shem, and then Shem became a servant of Japheth. And Japheth dwelt in the tents of Shem. All right, so we covered 5 points. The Bible is accurate historic book. It's an accurate genetics book. It's an accurate geographic book. It's an accurate linguistic book. And it's obviously an accurate prophetic book. So thankfully, even though we talked a lot about captivity, Canaan being cursed, Shem being cursed, really, and the Japhethites bringing those curses to many peoples in the world. And of course, a lot of them been cursed too. Just think about World War II. So thankfully, Yahweh tells us in the Bible of a prophecy when all mankind will be set free from captivity and persecution. And that talks about the year of Jubilee. And if we look in Luke chapter 4, verses 16 through 19, Luke chapter 4, verses 16 through 19, Yeshua came to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. The book of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me. Because of this, he has anointed me to proclaim the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim deliverance to the captives, to give sight to the blind, to set at liberty those having been crushed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of Jubilee of the Lord."